About the plight of the homeless and more, we're now joined by Jean-Ray Knighton-Fitt from the registered Christian non-governmental organization UTurn Homeless Ministries. Jean-Ray, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the Globe.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Well, today is World Homeless Day, but what's there to celebrate?
What is it to celebrate? Well, I guess many people who have come off the streets successfully. It's certainly been our approach to this World Homeless Day and the next 21 days as we move towards the elections is to focus on stories of hope. So we've posted some of those on our website and our YouTube channel, and we'll be broadcasting them with social media. People whose lives have been turned around from people who once lived on the street and felt helpless, felt stuck, and now don't. Now are in stable jobs and houses, and they live sober lives. So there's lots to celebrate, and it's a good focus to have, a focus of hope.
So what's the estimate number of homeless people here in South Africa?
So the estimate, and this is pre the COVID hard lockdown, was about 200,000 people living on the streets or homeless people across the country. We have reason to believe it's gone up significantly, but we don't have figures at this stage. So 200,000 is around the kind of number we were talking about a year or two ago.
Now, Jean-Ray, what are some of the major factors that compel people to end up on the streets? I mean, I suppose it's a multiplicity of reasons. It could be economic, it could be, mental health, it could also be social, considerations.
Yes, absolutely. Sibiru, I think there's kind of three things that we look at as common factors. The first is sense of personal dysfunction. People who have issues with mental health issues and or addiction problems, developmental issues, and often what this tends to do is lead towards a breakdown of relationships, severing of relationships with family, community, and then added to that the problem inevitably of the inability to sustain themselves economically. They can't get a job, can't hold down a job. And so once you're in a position where you can't make enough money to take care of yourself, and you can't keep your relationships good with your family, and that may be your fault, it might be their fault, it might just be a very, very complex set of factors, you end up on the street. And so those are the areas certainly that we focus on: the rebuilding of a person's functionality in society, the ability to relate, and then obviously their ability to earn money. That's really important.
And no doubt it's not a pleasant experience being out on the streets. I mean, let's talk about some of the challenges that they go through on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people tend to look at homeless people and think the big problem is food. And it's not that food is never a problem, but it's not generally the biggest problem. What I hear from people constantly is safety. The fear of attack, especially from women. There's a lot of fear and the need for safety. The obvious thing we talked about earlier was ablutions. Just the simple thing of getting a toilet or a place to wash. And then obviously the ability to find employment. You're just not trusted if you live on the street. So it's very hard to break through that. Again, a common thing I hear from people we're working with is just basic loneliness and self-esteem. You feel like you're no good. Everybody treats you like you're no good. And so you believe that about yourself, and it just makes you spiral downward. And then, of course, the issue of harassment by security, which is really linked to that safety issue, has been a huge issue in the news recently. There's people being harassed by security forces, losing what they have, losing IDs, losing their clothes, etc., and it just helps them or creates this downward spiral, as well as obviously pressures, just the pressures to survive that they're under on the street.
No, Jean-Ray, I remember, sometime last year, early last year, as a matter of fact, when the initial lockdown was imposed on South Africans, the government was highly credited for its approach, for its all-embracing approach in terms of getting people out of the streets, and that included the homeless, as the government organized shelter for homeless people all over South Africa. But then there's been some criticism in terms of, giving homeless people a false sense of hope, because after the initial 14-day lockdown, then the people were thrown back onto the streets. So do you get a sense then that the government is doing enough to cater for the needs of homeless people?
I would say simply we're not nearly enough. I know the government has, pardon me, the challenge, massive number of challenges when it comes to social issues. So, respecting that and understanding that, I think a big issue is the way resources are allocated. That is a problem. There's often this kind of short-term solution, as you say, 2-3 weeks, and then you're back on the street. A kind of a hit-and-run approach to this, or a relief approach to just handing out. We can just hand out something. We can give food. We can get that on camera, and we can look good, and not nearly enough of an approach which is developmental, deliberate, long-term, which really moves the needle on these issues. And then worst of all, can be a reactive or punitive approach. When security moves in, breaks down everything, throws water over people at night, we hear stories of that, and just makes the whole situation worse. So I think government has, in many ways, if we look at the lockdown period, and the safe spaces that were created, worked well in some cities, less well in other cities. But yes, certainly it's got to be a long-term approach, a long-term commitment. It can't be this in and out, a little bit now and then nothing. A much more developmental approach is needed.
Yes. And for those already finding themselves out on the streets, what should be done to help them?
Well, look, we've really said, and in our experience, it needs to be a long-term approach. It takes us, once somebody feels they're ready to leave the street, it takes us as UTurn about 2 years to really work through the drug and alcohol issues, the work readiness issues, if you like, the ability to actually work and deal with lots of stuff that's going on the inside of them, and of course the relational issues, and get them to a point where they're back stable and able to enter the workforce as productive citizens. So it is long, and we need cooperation from government on that. We need support for that kind of approach, and to look at best practices, what's working out there. UTurn has a fantastic model, other organizations do as well. So let's support the models that really work, that have a results-based kind of approach. That's what I would say government should be doing, and private sector and the community at large.
And with the local government elections coming up in just less than a month, are political parties addressing issues affecting homeless people, or are they simply focusing on those who've got homes and those who've got IDs to vote?
Unfortunately, yes. As far as I can see, and I don't see what every single political party is doing and saying out there, but certainly the information I get and I see, what I observe is this is not really being addressed. It's not really been spoken about, and it's strange, because homelessness is the space where we see poverty. Where, let's say, poverty is most visible to the private sector, to policymakers. It is the tip of the iceberg of the massive issues we have right across our city and townships and rural areas. But it is a space that should be very, very visible, and you would expect to be spoken about more by political parties.
Now, focusing on your organization, do tell us about UTurn and the kind of work that you do.
Okay, yes, thank you. Our approach is very much based on this fundamental belief that every single person is intrinsically valuable. Nobody should have to sleep on the street. It's the value of the human being and the dignity of the human being. So we approach this problem of homelessness not with a handout mentality, but with a deliberate attempt to create pathways out of homelessness and into a flourishing life. And so we have a four-phased approach. We have service centers which are based in strategic locations. This is in Cape Town, where we are based. in areas where there are high numbers of homeless people. And that's a space they can come into, get their basic needs met. But most importantly, they can get onto the program, onto the pathway, if you like, where they are offered opportunities which will help them get off the street. And then when they're ready, when they're ready to commit to the next phase, we move into a drug rehab phase. More than 70% of people living on the street are involved in substance abuse of some kind. So it's a necessary phase. And once they complete that, they move into our work readiness program, which is really the long haul. It's usually about 18 months of working in sheltered employment, but being taught what it means to work in the real world and being given the skills, mostly in our retail stores that we have. And at the same time, having intensive therapy, group therapy and individual therapy, working through a lot of stuff. And when they get to that point that both the therapy team and they themselves feel, I'm ready to move on and start looking for a job in the open market. And when they get it, they move on and they graduate. And then our fourth phase is aftercare, where we keep track and we monitor and increasingly support people who have graduated from our program. And we're very proud that we have an over 80% success rate from those who have graduated from the program, over 80% success rate of sobriety, employment and accommodation in the long term. People stick it out. Once they've done the hard work, they get it right in the long term. So that's essentially UTurn's model in a nutshell.
And does UTurn then need help in any way to make sure that its programs are fulfilled?
Yes, absolutely. There's always the need for funding, of course. And particularly at this stage, I would say the need for funds to scale. There are very few other organizations like UTurn that handle the issue of homelessness in this way, and we partner with those that do. We have some great collaboration initiatives out there. But really funding to scale is really important, from government, from private sector, and just from ordinary people, to say we want organizations like UTurn to operate here in our neighborhood as well. Another practical thing is employment of people on our phase 3 program. We call them champions, so it's our employment of our champs. It's hard for anybody to get a job right now. Mm-hmm. But if you've been on the street, if that's your background, you've probably got a criminal record, probably been in jail at some time. Nobody wants to employ you. But unless people can actually get employed, they're never going to be sustainable off the street. So we need people to take the leap. And I don't mean just taking the guys begging on the corner and putting them into your company. I mean working with organizations that are working with those people to help them overcome issues. Okay. So we need goodwill from business. Okay. And then just will and support from the community at large. There's an attitude often of not in my backyard. We want you to fix the problem of homelessness, but fix it somewhere else. And while we do that, we're continually shunting people backwards and forwards. So there needs to be a will and a support for UTurn and for other organizations like UTurn that are doing this kind of long-term work with people.
Okay. And lastly, what would your message be to society at large, including government, when it comes to homeless people?
Yes, so really to take a developmental approach, and to government particularly, I would say play a coordinating role in this. Work with the organizations that are doing the hard work, that are in it for the long haul. Don't just do this hit and run approach, look good for the elections, hand out some soup. Really work with us and help to coordinate the efforts of various NGOs in a way that is very deliberate in terms of shifting the needle on this thing. And I would love to encourage people just to look at our website. It's homeless.org.za, or Google to find out more about this issue of homelessness and how it's playing out in our country and who's doing what. Information and knowledge is power in this arena like any other.
All right, Jean-Ray, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, thank you. That was Jean-Ray Knighton-Fitt from UTurn Homeless Ministries talking to us about World Homeless Day and the plight of homeless people here in South Africa.